Demon Hunters 5 Cursed, written by Avril Sabine. Dedication. For my kids. Life would be extremely lacking without each of you. Book description. After running into Luca, Penelope gets out of her car, worried he's hurt. When he tells her she's now his master and he's a genie, or a jinn as he says, she wants to put as much distance as possible between them. He's obviously insane. Others believe he's a genie, even though Penelope doesn't. They're willing to do anything to end her life so they can become Luca's master, including summoning demons. Chapter 1. Penelope threaded her way through the crowd, a glass in one hand, her phone in the other, as she checked the time. It was after 11. Surely now she could go home. If only she could find one of her friends to let them know she was leaving. Dana had sworn this was the party she had to be at this weekend. That everyone who was anyone would be there. She'd driven nearly an hour and had wanted to leave not long after she'd arrived. She supposed it hadn't helped that within minutes of meeting up at the front door, Dana, Susie and Harrison had all wandered off in different directions, leaving her alone. She hadn't seen them since. Tucking her phone back in her purse, she took another sip of her drink. She looked around the room again. No one. She was getting sick of this. If she didn't find them in the next 10 minutes, she was going home. They'd all come in their own vehicles, so it wasn't like they needed her to stick around and give them a lift. Someone bumped into her, spilling their wine over her hand and forearm, muttering sorry as they hurried away. She stared after them. Obviously she'd waited too long to leave. Ditching her glass on a nearby side table, she headed for the bathroom where she washed her hand and arm. This wasn't the way she wanted to spend a Saturday night. Not that she had any idea how she wanted to spend it. Or even how to spend the rest of her life. She'd felt this way ever since she'd finished Year 12 back in November. It was now early February and she had no clue what to do with her days. Her grandmother was adamant that she needed to attend university. Her father agreed. Her mother wanted her to help with her many charities until she figured out what she was going to do with her life. Neither option interested her. She needed to figure something out soon. Her grandmother's lectures were driving her crazy. Who cared if her grandmother had planned her entire life by the time she was 18? She wasn't anything like her grandmother. She was a different person, even if she'd been named after the woman. Drying her arm, Penelope sighed. This had to be the most boring party she'd been to this year. She'd find a quiet spot and ring her friends. If they didn't answer, then that was too bad. She was going home. Wandering through the house, she sidestepped around the many groups talking and laughing, drinks in their hands. Finding a closed door, she opened it, slipping inside and shutting the door as she switched on the light. Two people with arms wrapped around each other turned to face her. She stared back at them, her expression going blank as her mind tried to grasp what she was seeing. For a second she nearly reached for a strand of her light brown hair, that had recently been streaked a golden blonde, to twist it between her fingers. It had been Susie who'd pointed out it was something she did when she was uncomfortable, and Harrison had been there too, his arm wrapped around her waist, not Susie's. Harrison cleared his throat. Penelope, Susie interrupted him. This isn't what it seems. Inside she felt a stabbing pain. One of her best friends with her boyfriend. This wasn't meant to happen. Not to her. Don't worry about it. She waved breezily, as if brushing away the moment. I probably should thank the two of you. You should? Susie looked confused. Yes. I've been trying to think of a polite way to end things for the past week. I didn't want there to be any dramas, since we attend the same parties and our parents are friends. She forced her lips to curve into a smile as she met Harrison's gaze. I guess you must have picked up on that. Ah well, Harrison shifted from one foot to the other. Although I am disappointed you didn't give me the same courtesy of finding a polite way of ending things first. The door was flung open and Dana burst in speaking as she did. Susie, I lost sight of. Her mouth dropped open as her gaze landed on Penelope. There were several seconds of drawn-out silence before she spoke. Pen. The pain Penelope felt intensified. It took all her self-control to keep a smile in place. Both of her best friends had been lying to her. This is good timing. Now I don't have to ring any of you and let you know I'm leaving. Already? Dana asked. It's too early to go home. The night has barely begun. I know, but I've had a better offer. Before they could ask her what offer, she strode from the room, letting her smile fade. The pain remained. She doubted it would fade so easily. The scene that had greeted her when she turned on the bedroom light played over in her mind in an endless loop. She had no idea how she managed to walk through the house, find her convertible, and get in the car without falling apart. The pain was nearly overwhelming. As bad as the one she'd experienced last month when she'd returned home to find the dog she'd rescued had been taken to the RSPCA. Her mother had been horrified that she'd considered keeping him, and had offered to buy her a more suitable breed. She hadn't wanted a different one. She'd wanted hers. But it had been too late. Arriving at the RSPCA, she'd learned he'd already been adopted, and they'd refused to give her any details. Seeing someone heading towards her, she started the car, checking in the rearview mirror before reversing. Catching a glimpse of her blue eyes, she stared for a moment, surprised at how wide they were. They ached with unshed tears. She couldn't stay here. Not without ending up sitting here crying and being found by Dana, Susie or Harrison. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of learning how much they'd hurt her. As she'd pointed out, they attended the same parties and their parents were friends and dragged them along to some of the same functions. She didn't want any of them looking at her with pity in their eyes or spreading rumors about her behind her back. She reversed onto the road and headed towards home. Halfway there, she changed her mind, not wanting to risk them learning she'd been running home to hide. She drove aimlessly around Brisbane, not knowing where to go. She didn't feel sociable. All she wanted to do was go home and lock herself in her bedroom and try and forget every second of this night. Ahead, the streetlights changed to red and she slowed, watching a man stumble along the footpath ahead of her, cradling a bundled-up blanket in his arms and wearing a black suit. She guessed he was drunk with how he couldn't manage a straight line. But surely he wouldn't be wandering around drunk at nearly midnight, carrying a baby. She couldn't imagine what else would be in the bundle. Not with how he held it. The light changed and she drove forward, glancing at the man again. She was nearly past him when he stumbled and staggered in front of her car. She slammed on the brakes, swearing as she hit him, a sick feeling filling her stomach as the man disappeared from sight. Her first thought was of the bundle. The sick feeling increased and she fumbled with her seatbelt, trying to unbuckle it. A glance at the time on her dash showed it wasn't yet midnight. In less than an hour her life had fallen apart. He had to be unharmed. Or at least not seriously hurt. Him and the bundle. She hadn't been going that fast. The seat belt finally released and retracted. She turned on the hazard lights before getting out of the car. Her legs felt shaky and she stumbled in her high heels, something she hadn't done since she was a preteen. Not even when she was tipsy. Before she could reach the man, he staggered to his feet, the wrapped bundle cradled against his chest as he weaved his way towards the footpath. "Are you okay?" She almost groaned. "Of course you're not. I hit you. Where are you hurt?" Hurrying after him, she reached out to take hold of his arm and help him back to the footpath. He was all in black, including the shirt he wore under his suit jacket. He pulled away before her fingers could make contact. "Don't touch me." There was a faint hint of an accent to his words. "I'm sorry." She had no idea what to do. He staggered with a growled curse, dragging himself upright before his knees hit the bitumen. Penelope grabbed him by the wrist, worried he'd collapse. She gasped when some of her fingers made contact with his skin. A sensation like pins and needles combined with static electricity shot through her hand. He pulled roughly away from her. "I asked you not to touch me. Why did you not listen?" She stared at him, massaging the fingers that had come in contact with him. "I was trying to help." She frowned. He didn't seem drunk. She began to wonder why he'd been walking like someone who'd downed an entire bottle of scotch. Was he sick? He held the bundle out to her. It was Penelope's turn to take a step backwards. She eyed the man warily. He was only slightly taller than her at 5'7", his hair a dark blonde, his eyes a piercing blue. It was his expression that made her wary. It was one of resignation, hate, and arrogance. A strange combination. She glanced at the bundle. "Why would I want that? It now belongs to you." He shoved it into her hands and she was forced to take it or let it drop. The light blanket unwrapped enough that she could feel something within the folds. She moved them apart until she was staring at a man's gold watch, relieved it wasn't a baby like she'd first thought. Her gaze returned to the man, a question in it. "Tell me to put the watch on you so I can touch it without pain." Penelope made a sound that could have been any single-syllable answer. The man took it for yes and slipped the watch onto her wrist so it hung loose like a bracelet. She pulled back from him, the blanket falling to the bitumen. "Who are you?" Her words, which she'd meant to be a demand, came out as a whisper. "Conte Luca Martino Simonetti." "Who are you?" "An Italian count?" Impossible. Maybe he'd hit his head. Although there didn't seem to be any blood or bruises. She automatically answered him. "Penelope Elizabeth Grayson." She slowly shook her head, trying to make sense of the situation. "Can I help you? Give you a lift somewhere? To a hospital maybe." A bitter laugh escaped Luca. "I have no desire to go to a hospital. Not that it matters anyway. The question is, what can I help you with? How may I serve you, master?" Penelope took an uncertain step away from him and closer to the driver's door. "Ah. I'm right, thanks. Maybe you should go home. Get some sleep or something. Then let us go home, wherever that may now be." Penelope swallowed loudly. Her heart started to race and she tried to judge the distance between her and the car door. It looked further away from her than Luca was. Could she make it in time? The sound of running footsteps caused her to spin and face two people coming towards her. Was this all part of a hoax? Were these his accomplices? She took another step towards the open car door as she glanced between Luca and the two who ran towards her. They looked to be around her age. The girl had hazel eyes and dark honey-colored hair while the boy had dark hair and brown eyes. They both wore black jeans, black t-shirts and carried bows. Who carried bows around with them? A gun would have made more sense. If anything about this night could make sense. They came to a stop, the girl looking from one to the other. Her gaze remained on Luca. "You're not a demon." "I was expecting a demon." "Who are you?" Penelope took another cautious step towards the driver's seat. It was the young man who answered. "I'm Dan, this is Emily." He gestured towards the young woman beside him, as he looked between Luca and Penelope, followed by a glance at the mark around his wrist. It was a thin black line that went completely around it. "Why can't we sense demons?" Luca looked from Dan to Emily. You are hunters? What brought you here? There are no demons involved in this situation. I am a jinn. There must be, Emily said. I wouldn't have had a premonition about this location and hour if there were no demons involved. What the hell is going on here? Penelope felt the car door against her back as she took another step. She was nearly there. A few more steps and she could drive away and forget all about this night. Forget every single part of it. Starting with Harrison and Susie. Who are you people? My master had a heart attack and was clinically dead for a few minutes. I had the chance of freedom, but you had to touch me. Luca glanced at Penelope before returning his attention to the hunters. You're not making sense. Penelope stepped sideways. Only another step and she'd be past the door. If she kept them talking, she should be able to make it before any of them made a move towards her. I am a jinn. You are my master. I'm making perfect sense. Penelope stared at Luca, forgetting to take another step. He'd said that before. A what? You'd probably know the term genie better, Emily said. Penelope laughed nervously. Yeah, right. Sure. Where's your lamp? You wear it. Luca gestured towards the watch at her wrist. So I rub the watch when I want 3 wishes? How modern of you. She shook her head. I'm not an idiot. What is really going on here? She should have gone straight home. First the party. Now this. Emily held out a business card. Call Father Joe when demons become involved. Leave your number with him and tell him you want me to call you. When the girl continued to hold out the card, Penelope took it and tossed it into the car. Sure. She was getting out of here and forgetting this day had ever happened. She retreated further. Although it was probably after midnight, so she could forget about Sunday too. I know you don't believe us. Penelope interrupted Dan. You're right. I have no idea what the 3 of you are planning, but I'm not staying to find out. Before she had a chance to get in her convertible, there was the sound of vehicles racing towards them and Luca threw himself at her, pushing her to the ground. He turned at the last second, so she landed on top of him. The glass of the window rained over her and she tried to pull away from him. His arms tightened around her. Who wants to kill you? Emily demanded from beside them on the ground.